So welcome, my name is Chris Ajemian. I'm the CEO and founder of Kate's Tutoring and Educational Services, and I'm your co-host for today. I hope that you're all doing well. You and your loved ones are all healthy, strong, and well during this time. So today's topic, with the coronavirus shutting down schools and forcing cancellation of tests until at least June, a number of colleges across America have moved to test optional policies. However, there's an overwhelming majority, particularly the most selective schools, that have maintained their standardized testing requirements. With the virus now seemingly beginning to plateau and College Board ACT and ETS rolling out plans for at-home testing online, as well as monthly administrations for tests in the fall, the question for how best to prepare for these tests, along with the age-old question of dealing with the anxiety and emotions related to them, has returned. So high-stakes tests can be an intensely emotional journey. For students, learning to manage these emotions is really key to earning consistently stronger scores and grades, whether they're taking the ISEE and the SHSAT, the NJSLA, the SAT and ACT, APs, or even in the international system, IB, GCSEs, and A-levels. With most dates, again, wiped out until no earlier than the mid-June or maybe the coming AP exams, now is actually a great time to dive into this topic because students have the time and the space to practice the concepts without the stress of an impending exam. So today, I'm joined by my colleague and good friend, Kate's UK Director and Senior Tutor, Nyssa Wilton, to discuss probably my favorite aspect of the entire test prep process, and that's the importance of emotional self-regulation and how to practice it throughout the preparation process and successfully on test day. Again, this is one of my most valuable and valued collaborators. She helps students all over the US, the UK, and Europe to attain really strong, if not elite SAT and ACT scores and earn top grades in college and in high school. As well as working with us at Kate's, Nyssa also mentors students in academic writing and study skills for 2 colleges at the University of Cambridge in the UK. She has a PhD in English literature from the University of Texas at Austin, and in all her roles, she loves helping students develop the mindset and the skills necessary for success. So today, together, we'll walk you through some tips and practical guidance on how to overcome anxiety and navigate the emotional experience of testing. So Nyssa, my friend, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Good. It's my pleasure to be here, Chris. Thanks for that introduction. And this is my first webinar, and I'm glad that it's on such an important topic, test taking and managing emotions. How are you?
Beautiful. I'm doing great, thanks. I'm feeling good today. Had a good night's sleep, which we'll talk about the importance of that.
Excellent.
And
Yeah.
just feeling good. So just some housekeeping things quickly. This is actually going to facilitate today's conversation. If you do have questions at any point in time, please ask them in the Q&A panel, which you can access by scrolling over the bottom of your screen. Additionally, for the best experience, we recommend that you set your screen to gallery view, which you can do by scrolling over the top right corner of your browser window and selecting gallery. You may also want to click view options at the top of your window, where you can actually select side-by-side mode so that when Nyssa and I appear on your screen, we appear either side by side or on top, as well as next to the slides in the same window. So we're going to talk about just the agenda for today. Nyssa, if you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, great. So today's discussion, we're going to be talking about 5 broad topics. Emotions matter. Emotions can be managed. Handling emotions during preparation, preparing yourself for test day, and performing on test day. While we're happy to take a question or 2 during these segments, we're also going to have a question and answer session at the end of today's webinar. Again, please enter any questions into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. And then we also have a contact slide, which is our next slide. And so if you have a private matter or if there's a question that we didn't discuss in today's webinar, please email us at info@katestutoring.com. And if you're in the US, there's our New York office phone number, and the UK, there's our UK office phone number. And with that, Nyssa, here we go. So Emotions matter. So this is a quote from one of my students in New York City. Her name is Catherine, and we're going to start off with this, and she was one of my LSAT students. Cognitive endurance is only one aspect of doing your best on test day. You contend with anxiety, doubt, and the debilitating thoughts inside your head that I like to call the voice. But when things feel rocky on test day, as I'm sure they will, I need to trust that if I just stay calm and muscle my way through it, I can still do well. So this is one of Catherine's reflections, Nyssa, after a few sessions into her program. Catherine was someone who was diagnosed with clinical anxiety, dyslexia, ADHD, and struggled with test anxiety since elementary school. Yet after understanding some of the basic principles on how to manage her emotions during testing, she scored a 172 on her LSAT, which is like a 720 on an SAT subject test out of 800, or a 32 out of 36 on an ACT section. She now attends Yale Law School. So, Nyssa, emotions do matter, and I'll add that they don't go away. So one of the things that I've heard you say in the past is that you self-describe yourself as a latecomer to this concept of how emotions matter. I'd love for you to share your own thoughts on that journey.
Sure. I was definitely a latecomer to the importance of managing emotions for test preparation. When I started tutoring, my belief was that content was going to be the most important thing that I conveyed to a student, and that maybe a little strategy would be useful too. I didn't really see the place for much managing emotions, maybe with the odd student or two, but I learned pretty quickly that that was not the case. One of the first students I worked with was a student I worked with you as well. We both saw her. And early on, I saw the effects of your work with her, and prioritizing emotion completely changed my thinking. The way you prioritized emotion completely changed my thinking on the topic. I got stuck with this student, and I'm going to call her Isabel, just for the purposes of this conversation. So she was running out of time on the reading section regularly, and I knew she had to change her approach to that section to finish in time. Session after session, I tried to convince her to read through the passage quickly, only for the main idea and getting a sense of the structure rather than reading it closely for detail. And I could get her to occasionally try that approach in a session, but it was mostly to humor me. And anytime I had her take a test on her own, she reverted back to the slow, careful reading and would run out of time. Then you had a session with her, and the next time I saw her, she brought in the highest reading section score she'd ever earned. When I asked her how she got the score, she said, "Chris taught me this great new strategy. He said I should read the passage quickly, just looking for the main idea and how the passage is organized, and then go to the questions." And I was stunned. It was like she hadn't even registered what I'd been trying to get her to do, exactly what I wanted her to do for weeks.
Exactly.
Yeah. So then I went back to you and I said, "What did you do, and how do I do that?" And how did you do it?
So, well, first of all, this happens all the time, right? It's sort of like me and my wife. I'll say something to her, and then she'll ignore it. And then 6 months later, she'll be like, I met this stranger on the street, and they said this thing to me. And it was like totally brilliant. And of course, it's exactly what I said to her 6 months ago. So there's a lot going on there. But in Isabel's case, I asked her a very simple question, which is, do you actually believe that you can earn the score that you want? And she said, no. I said, until you can, nothing that I or Nyssa say to you will ever work. So this comes back to a primary question that we ask all of our students, which is, who do you want to be on test day? Do you really believe that you can be that person? That's where it starts.
And you paid attention to emotion, specifically her fear of failing on test day. And what's amazing is that fear of failing on test day didn't just affect her on test day, but it was already affecting her and reducing her willingness to take risks and try different approaches. So that was like the first moment where I thought, maybe there's something to this managing emotions. but later that year, I worked with another student who really convinced me of the importance of managing emotion, and I'm going to call him William. So before William became one of our students, he was already getting nearly a perfect score on every practice test that he took.
Wow. Really
He'd
impressive.
done that just on his own, like he had just prepared on his own and that
Really?
well. Yeah, amazing student. But then he took his first actual test and he got somewhere around a 1300, which is a good score, but it was too low for the schools that he wanted to apply to, you know, like Harvard,
And
Stanford, Yale.
he wasn't trending there either. He was trending much higher as well. So.
Exactly. It was totally out of left field that he had got a score that was so low. So that's when he signed up for tutoring, which means that he already knew all of the content. So my theory that the thing that I'm really going to have to teach him is content that just went out the window. There was no content to go over. He knew it all. We did spend a lot of time on strategy because he needed to know exactly what to do if and when he got nervous on test day. But for the most part, my job as his tutor was to help him manage emotions on test day. So after working with those two students, I knew that managing emotions was an integral part of almost every student's test preparation because emotions really do matter.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, you have a nice illustration from your book. Let me. I'm going to pull it up. Let's see. There it is. So here, this is a nice illustration of the different aspects of test preparation and how they
Do I
combine.
see it? I'm not sure if I see it actually.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I had thank you for letting me know. Let me
Yeah.
share that again. There we go. There. Now do you see it?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah,
Perfect.
sure. This one. Right.
Great, right.
Right.
So what's nice about this is that we can see the gray areas, the knowledge the students come to the test, come to test preparation with.
Right.
The yellow is that content mastery, and then we see the brown is the strategy mastery, and then that final bit is the test taking skill mastery.
Right.
So my question for you now is, Chris, for that final bit, that test taking skill mastery, how much of that would you say is managing emotion?
I'd say it's almost entirely managing emotion. You know, usually people, I always say to students that it's the last 20%, right, that takes 80% of the effort and time. You know, people normally experience a pretty quick improvement when they learn whatever content there is to learn and test strategies. So the yellow and like the brown, but it's a test taking skill, understanding how to keep yourself focused, not just necessarily on the task, but also like emotionally focused and on the task. There's a lot going on there. And, you know, I'll add to that. I'd say that psychological focus and or distraction is normally the source of all careless errors on testing. And it's, you know, the emotional aspect complicates that, but also the emotional domain is also where students tend to struggle with timing.
I love that.
Emotion is normally why people are slowing down and frankly choking.
Yeah, that's great. That kind of how the emotional aspect affects timing and the psychological aspect affects the note taking.
Mm-hmm.
So, as we said, emotions can be managed.
Yes.
And here, so what we've got up right now is this theory for success. And I love this theory for success. I know, Chris, when you were finishing your master's at Harvard, your research looked at the role of emotion in identity development. And in your work as an educator, you've applied those insights to test taking. I see you've made a connection between emotion and mood here. So learn to manage your emotion, and then you can regulate your mood. And I find that interesting, partly because I'm not sure if I know the difference between emotion and mood. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's you know, it's a pretty there's some nuance to it, right? but you know, I'm not going to get too deep into the science of it because I'm trying to keep this somewhat accessible. But the difference between emotion and mood is really time scale. Emotions, or an emotion like stress, emotions are things that you experience at a micro time scale, so like seconds or milliseconds. And mood is the culmination of emotional responses that create a state of mind or a state of being, like anxiety, that exists in what's called a meso time scale, so minutes, hours, or even days. So to use an analogy, I like to say that emotions are to mood as bricks are to the wall.
Okay. That's really interesting. I think a lot of people might say that emotions just happen and we don't have any control over them. So if there are some people in our audience who are thinking that way, can you tell us a little bit more about how you control your emotions when you're taking a test?
Yeah, sure. You know, it begins with how you feel first about your preparation leading up to that day, combined with how you feel the morning of the test based on your sleep, exercise, and nutrition. You know, those factors, along with whatever you encounter on that test day, whether it's the testing center environment or a particular test section like the math, a specific question like geometric sequences, or you know, a concept, a word, a symbol, all these pieces, they trigger a state of mind and feelings. And however good or bad you may feel, it's about what you do in these moments that matter, right? And the options are, you know, only really three. Number one, it's being proactive and being constructive, like taking, you know, steps to stay on task and solve the problem. The ambivalent action is omitting or skipping a question, you know, coming back to it later on, right? You're not making a definitive decision just yet. You're going to come back to that, and you know, you're sort of tabling it for discussion for the moment. Or thirdly, it's doing something destructive, like rushing or blindly guessing, or unfortunately, in some cases, just like falling apart, you know, at the test. And yeah, these actions, they reinforce it, or they even change your state of mind. So, you know, we want to choose only constructive actions because they trigger positive thoughts and positive feelings, which influence your mood for the next event, or, you know, whether it's the next question or the next concept or the next sentence. And as you cycle through this action pathway, if you do it constructively, you're creating a positive feedback loop, finding a rhythm, and then reinforcing this positive mood, which can carry you through all the way through the test.
Okay, so it sounds like it's not so much controlling the emotion that a student is experiencing in a particular emotion, but reacting to any emotion in a constructive way.
Absolutely.
Am I right in thinking that taking a constructive action means that the student will probably feel better in the next moment?
Yeah, it's like that positive feedback loop I was talking about, right? You know, positivity begets positivity, which begets even greater positivity. So you really want to get on a roll with the feelings. And if you're, you know, once you, you know, sort of establish a pattern of positivity, it's much easier to stay in the groove and sort of ride that wave.
So it doesn't matter where you start, as long as you respond to whatever emotion you have in a positive way, you're going to get to a positive place.
Right.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that our actions and our thoughts influence our emotional state. Is that
Mm-hmm.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it really starts with this idea, um, you know, of interoception, right? And so interoception is a term coined by Lisa Feldman Barrett. She's a neuroscientist from Northeastern who wrote the book, How Emotions Are Made. I highly recommend that book. It sort of changed my life. And and I'm happy to share the link to it when we send out, you know, follow-up messaging after the webinar. And that book builds upon a lot of research that shows cognition or thinking and emotion are part of one interdependent system. Emotions are not like these discrete, like standalone things like we see in the Pixar movie Inside Out. That's not how it works. Interoception is your feeling of your sensations that come from the movements inside your body. The easiest way to think about it, it's like it's a sense like hearing or, you know, taste or sight, touch, smell, but it monitors the internal status of all your systems. So, you know, all the comings and goings in your body. It's sort of like, look at the endocrine system, it's sort of like the hypothalamus. And according to Barrett, Your brain is wired to feel these sensations and to really feel them as mostly, and I think we have a slide on this idea of pleasantness, unpleasantness, arousal, and one more, it's calmness actually, right? So, your internal eye can literally only communicate like those four sensations, but all day long, interoception sends your brain status updates. And these are Barrett's words, like a teenager in Snapchat, only worse. But whatever sensation you're feeling in your body, the brain develops a theory or a guess as to what originated it or what caused it, based on your previous experiences with those sensations. So in other words, it makes what we call a prediction about what's going on.
That's so interesting. So interoception sends our brain a Snapchat message that is one of these four basic emotions: pleasantness, unpleasantness, arousal, and calmness. And that's all it can do. But it doesn't, apparently, from what I hear you saying, interoception doesn't send the message of why you're getting this particular emotion. So the brain steps in and makes a prediction. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So predictions are a lot of what we're doing when we're trying to help a student recondition themselves, right, during the test preparation process. Okay, so all these things that we feel, things like like joy, like fear, like stress, all these different things that we feel. These are all basically predictions. So our brain is constantly running predictions, and what we're seeing in our, it's running predictions on our sensory experience. And included in these predictions are the way that we feel or are supposed to feel when encountering something. Like, for example, people normally cry when we experience a sad part in a movie. And, it's like, here we got Titanic, right? We have Rose and Leonardo DiCaprio's character, I forget his name. They're about to say goodbye as he's freezing in the waters of the Atlantic. We recognize this content as sad, as well as the choice of music sort of manipulates our emotions into thinking, oh, this is sad, I'm supposed to cry, all right? And we do. So we're all programmed by Hollywood to react in a certain way. And the same can be said for a student's relationship to the math or the SAT. Now, our culture has built a sensory narrative around standardized testing. It is so ingrained in our culture, media, friends, schools, parents, we've succumbed to it. And in some ways, not all, but in some ways, it's a fallacy. So the way we can change our attitude, behavior, and emotions is by changing our predictions about what the experience can be, as well as our predictions about what we're seeing in front of us on test day. And the research that I've done, I found that the secret to all of this is mood. Creating a positive mood environment around testing, preparation, and test day, that's the secret to a successful program. So you have to put the hours in, it begins with the right attitude, but this is why I frame test preparation as a rite of passage. It's something that we all go through. Well, most of us, right? At least people going into the U.S. Higher education experience. And it connects us. And so, but if you go through it with an open mind and a willingness to listen and see the value in it, especially when it comes to like emotion regulation, then it becomes a very constructive experience. And I've seen this process honestly change lives. So, but it begins with doing the work to recondition yourself with respect to the test, both in terms of preparation and the test taking experience.
So you've talked about how students need to put in the work of changing their predictions before they even get to test day. But can you also talk a little bit about what they should do when they feel nervous or anxious on the day itself?
Sure. Nerves and anxiety really come about on the day of the test because the student is heading into the unknown. It's really about the anticipation. And it's really just that, anticipation. It's not real, but a construct of our mind. Students really get this after they've sat their first test. Oftentimes I congratulate them, because they've walked into the belly of the beast and lived to tell about it. And frankly, the first test I'll talk about multiple tests in a second. But really the first test is about going in there and knowing that you can like literally walk out alive. But once they do, the anticipation is less of an issue for subsequent tests. But that's really what it is on test day for the most part. But whether it's your first test or your fourth test, to help manage this, I advise students that if you can manage your breath, then you can manage your emotions. The reason being is that by focusing on your breath, it brings you back to that micro time scale. So again, seconds, microseconds, and helps you stay focused in the moment and also on the moment. And then, to do that, we use a concept, and Barrett refers to it as something called recategorization. So I think we have a slide on this. Yeah, great. Thanks. Recategorization is just recategorizing your feelings. It's calling it something different. Okay. The technique that that we often recommend is this idea of taking negative feelings and turning them merely into physical sensations. Okay, whether that's a pleasant or neutral feelings, right? We're turning these things into physical sensations. Okay, so like for example, I'll say dissolve anxiety into a fast beating heart. The pounding that's in your chest, it's not really anxiety. Okay, maybe it's really more like anticipation, or better yet, it's excitement. So we're taking these feelings, recategorizing them as physical, and giving them a different name, and really kind of like muting them, if you will. I mean, I use this myself. I mean, every day of my life, I find myself in some stressful situation, and a lot of times like my leg will jiggle, and what I do, I'd have like a nervous twitch in my muscle, like my right calf, and what I'll do, like, oh, my muscle's twitching. Okay, it's a muscle twitch. Let it twitch. I'm now focused on the task. And that's how I kind of get myself back into focus. There's a guy named Joe Esposito. He's a karate sensei. I think we have a quote for him. He often coaches young karate students who are about to take their test for their black belt, and he'll say to them, "Hey, those butterflies you feel, make them fly in formation, right? Use it." Use the emotion, harness it in a way to actually drive your action. And I think it's a beautiful way of looking at it. And then also Barrett talks about how emotions can be used proactively and constructively with respect to testing, and particularly GRE testing. And we have a selection here. And some of the information that she's come across is that students achieve higher scores when they recategorize anxiety as merely a sign that the body is coping. And using recategorization and taking anxiety and turning it into excitement has effects on all different parts of our life, whether as she says over here, whether it's speaking in public or even when singing karaoke.
That's great. That's I love the Joe Esposito quote about the butterflies flying in formation. So we've talked about what emotions really are and how predictions work and recategorization. How do you handle the emotions, not necessarily of test day, but test preparation? Do you have any advice for how to handle those emotions?
Yeah, so I shared a couple of tips here on handling emotions during prep, and it really begins, to me, with focusing on the process and not the outcome, right? That's number one. And to illustrate this point for students, I often use this pyramid that we see in front of us to sort of demonstrate how focusing on the process is indeed what really leads to success. So, this is pretty straightforward, but conditioning is the foundation, and proper conditioning breeds confidence, which develops a positive attitude. The right attitude transforms behavior, and it's the proper behavior that brings about the results that one desires.
This is a really nice model, but how do students actually apply these ideas to overcoming test anxiety and managing the emotional experience of test prep? What do students have to do?
Are you indicating that I'm talking conceptually?
I think it's let's yeah, conceptual is good, but also let's tie it to an example too.
No,
Can
no, no,
we?
you're outing me, Nyssa. You're outing me. I get these questions a lot. Chris, what does it actually use these things? So, yeah, so, with the conditioning, you first have to, like with Isabel, right? You first have to believe that you can succeed. Otherwise, you're not going anywhere, right? That's only going to increase anxiety. However, even if you do commit, you need to accentuate the positive every step of the way. I always say to students, celebrate all wins. You missed 74 out of 75 questions on the English? Great. You got one right. Why? How? What were you doing on that one question that you weren't doing on the other ones? How can we do more of that on the other questions? And over time, this helps to create a positive mood around the process and helps you develop a positive attitude, right? So again, celebrating wins creates a positive mood around the process, helps you develop the right attitude towards it, and that motivates positive behavior, both in the process and on test day. And then when I say positive behavior, to me, what that means is on the exam, it means breaking down the text, breaking down the questions, the answer choices, breaking them down to smaller words and phrases so you can pick up on detail and nuance. I often say to students, if you want to get a perfect score or like maximize your potential on an exam, you have to sing the text as if it were Shakespeare. And I use that analogy because, with Shakespeare, every single word, every single, letter on that page meant something. And the same is true, when you're doing a standardized test, or frankly, even like just your schoolwork, right? So, that's one thing that I'll say. I'll also say to them, positive behavior in the exam means using your pencil as a weapon, right? Write down the steps to solve a math problem. These actions really allow you to test with care. And, when emotions do pop up, you do encounter an event like a hard question or an intimidating text or time pressure, you're able to self-regulate. What does that look like? That means like staying calm and focused. It means recategorizing emotion, meaning like, oh, wow, my mind is racing. Oh, wow, my mind is feeling blank. Or, oh, wow, my hands feel clammy. Okay, fine. Those are just, different events, and I'm going to objectify them. And now what's the right choice to make? What's the constructive choice to make in this moment? You do that, it builds confidence and energy, and that just leads to the results. If you're able to do all these things, the results will take care of themselves. That's because you've internalized all the tactics and developed a discipline for success. And when we do that, like an actor who knows all of his lines, we can just play the role. We can just take the test.
Oh, that's great. As you've been talking about preparing for test day, I've been wondering about a specific issue that some students have when they're preparing for tests, which is procrastination, which is often an emotional.
Well, it's adults as well.
That is true. Yes, I occasionally suffer from this still. So, yeah. But so asking for a friend, which of these techniques would work for a student or adult who is procrastinating?
Sure. So I have to give props to Brian Tracy, who's that motivational speaker and success coach. He has that concept. I think there's actually a book on it called Eat a Frog. And when he says eat a frog, he means do the thing that you most don't want to do. All right, do that thing first. Every day, so it's done and over with, and the rest of your day is just a whole lot easier, right? Mm-hmm. And so, for testing, what I advise students to do is to make test prep the first thing that they do, even if it's just 30 minutes a day after they come home from school or finish their schoolwork, right? Just get it done. Get it out of the way, get it done, and then you can focus on more important matters like your schoolwork, your extracurriculars, or like a passion project that you're building, right? Or, in these days, helping out your family during coronavirus. And over time, if you keep on eating the frog or, getting the prep out of the way, because you keep doing it, it becomes less scary, right? Familiarity breeds confidence, and confidence breeds success. So, as you keep doing it, you kind of get over the fear, anxiety, stress of it, And, it even becomes enjoyable because, then you're actually able to see this for what it really is, which is really a game more than a test. So, so those are, that's how I would say, you can actually take, this pyramid or this, triangle here and actually employ it. But there's other things too, right? I think I maybe sent some slides on this idea of falling in love with failure, right? I always say to people that, the road to success is paved with failure. The sooner you start making mistakes, the sooner you're going to start to improve. You want to make as many mistakes as quickly as possible. And by the way, you also want to forgive yourself when you're making these mistakes, even the silliest. You want to hold yourself to a high standard, absolutely. But you also want to be compassionate as you progress towards that high standard. This is a tough road. It's hard to begin with, so be easy on yourself. Additionally, you also want to know the math involved, right? There's, in the Great Expectations book, I talk about how, students, if they want to, improve an area of strength, they really want to, do about 400, 500 questions in that particular domain. If it's an area of weakness, you want to probably be completing 1,800 questions, particularly if you're facing timing challenges. So, it's really important to understand that it's really about volume of questions as well. And so I'll be talking a little bit about why it's important to kind of start early, but also too, this idea of doing practice tests and doing full practice tests. So that's really important. And then also, just to kind of also help diffuse anxiety and stress as you're preparing for the emotional experience of preparation is plan for multiple tests. Every student takes this exam at least twice, and really 3 and sometimes more. We have a couple of case studies on the website that show some students who made some, starting off in different places, who all kind of end up in the same place, which is a really high score, a great score. And, it's clear, even the people who start out at a high score, they took the test multiple times, and that's just acceptable. And in lots of schools in fact, most schools allow you to send more than one test date. You don't have to be, perfect to be, remarkable. And, you're allowed to take multiple tests. So that also diffuses stress in the process. But also, the other thing too about the emotional experience of preparation is this idea of the parents, right? And, parents can help. I mean, to me, parents dictate the mood around this, because they're there between the sessions. And so I always say to parents, evaluate how you handle stress. You're modeling it for your son or daughter, okay? The way you handle stress is the way that they will probably handle stress, because you're setting the role. You're literally a role model in your own house. Also, set boundaries for talking about the test. Too many times parents are sending text messages about it, always talking about wherever they see the kid. I always say to them, pick a day during the week. Wednesday night at dinner, Sunday afternoon, whatever it is, and make that the conversation, right? Try to really kind of compartmentalize it. And then also recognize hard work and get involved. Hey, Nyssa, I saw that you went up 20 points on your SAT math section. Great job. Wonderful. Oh, Chris sent us the results. Sounds like you're really making some progress. Great work. Great work. I mean, that means the world. It means the world to a student. So, these are some ways that parents can help, and they're very powerful.
I, as a parent whose oldest child is about to get to the high stakes testing age for the first time, I'm really taking this on board, and not as a tutor, but as a parent. So this is great. I love the evaluate how you handle stress. I need to take notes myself for this. So this has been really interesting about not just how students can handle the emotional aspects of test preparation, but also how families can handle it. I wonder if we could switch just slightly now, and I'd be interested in hearing about what students themselves need to do to feel like they are going about the preparation process in an emotionally healthy way that diffuses anxiety. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think in the next section, I talk about, a few more things here and the parents, right? And we sort of talked about all this, right? Again, diffusing social pressure, letting the kids take charge, pinpointing fears, and then the next one, which builds off of point 3, which is most importantly, encourage them to no end, right? So then, as far as the next piece goes, prepare yourself for test day. A couple of things here. So number one, start early. The SAT is not a test of what you know; it's a test of how you think. ACT as well, and frankly, all the standardized tests. So in this regard, it's really more like athletic training, right? We're really like training your mental muscles, and that's what testing really kind of requires. And this takes time and consistent practice. It's like using the performance analogy again. It's like memorizing lines for a Shakespeare play. You can't throw yourself completely into the role until you know what you're saying backwards and forwards. And even then, you want weeks to do run-throughs and dress rehearsals, if not previews. And so from the SAT and ACT, I always say to students that your sole focus initially should be on learning and memorizing all the content and all the tactics that are conditioned to, so you're conditioned to perform on test day with respect to the material. And then, the more and more you do that, these tests are, basically they're not recycling the same questions necessarily. Well, the GRE does, but they are recycling the same concepts. So the earlier you start, the more that you can do. You start to see the patterns in the tests, and it's preparation really takes off when the student starts to see that for themselves, as opposed to like the tutor telling them what's going on, right? And also mock tests. The only way to really kind of bring things together and make sure that you've got the content strategy and test taking skill working, humming along, working together, is taking mock tests in a simulated testing environment. It's crucial. So this is not about taking your SAT practice test on your bed at home with the music on. It's about, I know during the school closures and coronavirus, this is a lot harder, but it's about putting yourself into a space that is foreign, is different. You're out of your comfort zone, right? This idea of handling the unknown. Put yourself into a less known, more unfamiliar, or more unknown space, so you can really learn to manage that experience. It's sort of interesting too, kind of, Ian Barr, who's on our team in the UK, he often talks about mock tests and how they're kind of like exposure therapy. And I think it's actually, it's a very apt analogy. So, and then, it's sort of interesting to see, what happens over the course of the process. I always say to students, you want to probably be taking at least like 10 mock tests, right? And over here we have a graphic from the Great Expectations book. This is a student whose name is Edward. He wound up going to the University of Pennsylvania. He started out at like a 22, and he wound up like at around a 34. And this is his progression. These are real results. And this is his progression over the course of the program. And you'll see that, as he came to his first official, second official, and third official tests, he would kind of like rise, and he'd be like really strong the week before the exam. And then he'd see like a bit of a dip, and that's completely common. Okay. But you'll also see too, over the course, like the macro time scale, right? The course of, a number of months, and in his case, I think actually a year, and multiple real tests and multiple mock tests, he was able to get himself up to a great score, because he was able to overcome all the internal factors that were leading to that dip. And you'll see that in his mock test 11, he dipped a little bit, but then on the actual real exam, he went up and got the 34 in the final test. And that's because he knew he was ready. So one of the funny things too about this, I've been getting this question a lot, is, what should students be doing during shelter at home with all this? And this from our work together in the Sutton Trust program, that even though you have to be sheltering at home, you can still, work on these principles, using the internet, right? So what does that mean? When we first started in the Sutton Trust program, a couple of years ago, well, actually 8 years ago, we were running what I call the meta mock test for 200 students all over the United Kingdom. and we'd say, hey, we're all starting at 10 a.m. Okay. And so everyone taking the exam at 10 a.m., there was a sense that other people were also taking the exam. That worked for them. And in the recent years, we've also offered students the ability to go online and actually have a virtual proctor, as well as, and if they can't make that, going to YouTube and having like a virtual proctor, but it's just like a screen and time passing, and they use that. And that's a way to do it as well. So, whether it's, shelter at home or, we're past the virus, the mock tests are really important. And then obviously this idea of using a watch. I feel like using a watch is a critical step in helping you manage anxiety and managing stress and emotion during the exam. So you want to make sure you set like clear intervals, right? Within which to work. And so you practice hitting your target scores within those time intervals. So like what we do is we advise that people break the test down, each section of the test into smaller individual subunits. So like, for example, on the SAT, in the reading section, it's 65 minutes, but it's also 5 passages always. And so it's 13 minutes on average. So, you ask the student to practice in 13-minute increments, right? 13 minutes per passage. And regardless of whether or not you have a ton of homework or not, you can do 13 minutes per day, right? So, and the more and more, you work with the watch, the more and more naturally conditioned you become to perform at that desired pace. And then frankly, in some ways, you don't really need the watch anymore. Nevertheless, if you are using the watch, I always say to students, you don't want to look at the watch more than say like 2 or 3 times per section, right? Or if you don't have a watch, look at the clock on the wall. And if that's the case, I also recommend that they check their watch, halfway through a section and then again at 3/4. So that's important. And then, a couple more things here, building healthy habits, right? Totally crucial to reducing anxiety and stress. So what does that mean? It means sleep, exercise, and eating well, okay? I always say to students, try to go to bed by 11 p.m. Sleep is really important. It's not always easy to get it because of school schedules, but if you're getting up around 6:30 a.m. each day, being in bed by 11:30 usually gives you enough. You'll be well served. Exercise. In fact, one really interesting sort of remedy for the physical emotional connection is exercise, and that can improve both mood and focus. In fact, one of our students in New Jersey, she credited her ACT score, she got like a 35, it's an amazing score, to a 2-week, 2-mile run exercise regimen. So I'm not saying you have to do that, but find what works for you, take the time and implement an exercise plan. If you want any more tips on that, I would say, try to exercise for as long as the test section is. So if it's like, say, ACT reading and science, exercise for 35 minutes. Okay, that will give you a sense, that will help train your body, condition your body to perform better in that section. And, it may sound curious, but there's also been a number of studies that demonstrate that students who do exercise more consistently, they're more consistently active physically, they do perform better on tests, specifically in math and also reading. And this last thing over here, this eating well, nutrition plays a huge part in test taking, huge, right? Barrett talks about the concept of the body budget, meaning the foods and fluids that she or that your body needs to operate optimally, including with respect to this idea of pleasantness and arousal. And if you eat trash, your body just cannot perform to capacity, and that leads to more stress. So, in general, I'll say to students, whether it's a mock test or the real exam, eat a full breakfast before the test, and just as importantly, make sure you have a snack. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but usually the infusion of energy that you get from the snack, the first break, kicks in right in time for your breakfast to wear off. So, and then just like, just sort of finally, you really want to apply all these things that we're talking about to the whole of your life, right? The whole of your life. So, I learned this back in 2005 on the SAT writing section. When you suddenly needed excellent grammar skills, My grammar skills improved because I embraced and applied the writing rules in all of my writing throughout my life, including, yes, my text messages. So you have to find ways to exercise these ideas however you can. And in terms of handling anxiety and stress, you can practice the way you handle stress on the SAT, for example, in the same way you handle the stress of your younger sibling screaming in your ear. Right? Don't scream back. Take a minute to ground yourself, take a deep breath, respond in a constructive rather than a destructive manner. For example, ask your sibling to calm down or ask what's wrong, right? The same works in testing. So employing these tactics in your personal life allows you to internalize them, a lot more quickly and effectively. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I think that's great, Chris. But let's bring it all together for test day. So they've done the preparation, they've eaten well, they've exercised, they've got enough sleep, they know the content, they know the strategies. What else should they be doing to prepare for test day?
Yeah, so I always talk about this idea of visualizing a positive and successful testing experience, right? If they can see themselves succeeding, then they can embody it. And that means not just cognitively, but also emotionally. So, the way that I actually do that is I like to ground things in writing, and specifically I like to help the students write a script. So I'm a big football fan, American football. I like, European football as well, but American football. And you often hear about offensive coaches who script their first 15 plays of the game. So like Andy Reid, who's the coach of the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the best all-time winningest coaches in the NFL. The Chiefs won the Super Bowl this past year. He always scripts his first 15 plays on offense every single game. So in some ways, borrowing from people like him, I like to script the entire experience for the student on test day, and it begins with the night before the actual exam. So if the exam's on a Saturday, it's really not the Friday, but the Thursday before is when you start to prepare. And so on that Thursday night, you want to make sure you get a good night's sleep. And in fact, my experience also, some studies indicate that it's a sleep that you get the night before that helps, really dictate success. So get a good night's sleep on the Thursday, if the test is on a Saturday, and then the night before the exam, people always ask, what should I be doing, if anything? Well, you don't want to be doing a lot. You may want to review your notes, right? You still want to get your bag ready, right? Like your ID, your registration, your pens, or rather your pencils rather, and have some fun, right? Like go to a movie, or watch a movie, or on Netflix, or dinner with friends, or exercise. Do something kind of fun to kind of just blow off some steam. Okay. And then, in the morning of the exam, you want to wake up at least an hour before you have to leave, right? You want to have a full breakfast. And, like I was saying earlier with the breakfast, you want to choose the right foods to put into your body to kind of help, again, create this proper body budget. And those are usually foods with a low glycemic index, or a GI. And these are foods that have a slow release of sugar. So it helps you sustain your energy over the course of the exam. Which sometimes can be 4 hours, or in some cases longer. And, there's a lot of foods that will help you there. I always say people try to maybe have oatmeal, not instant, oatmeal, but some good oatmeal, or bran, or unsweetened yogurt. And then for your snack at the break, I love apples, apples, grapes, oranges, cherries have a low GI, and some other sort of good snacks, or peanuts and seed mixes. And then, before you leave that morning, you may want to actually go for a run, or do some exercise, or even do a few warm-up questions to wake up your brain. Okay. So that gets you sort of in the zone, in the mode. And the first question you see on the actual exam is the first question that you've seen, right, all day. Take your bag and then leave for the testing center with plenty of time. And, in some cases, I'm not really showing it here, but in some cases, I'll literally script this to 15-minute intervals, right? Like wake up at 6:30 a.m., go for the run at 6:45, shower at 7:15, breakfast at 7:30, and so on. And then you also want to design for the arrival at the testing center. So smile. Right. It's amazing just how smiling just kind of improves your mood, gets your mood going, sort of lifts you up. And so smile when you meet the test administrators, smile at other students. These are ways that you can start to take control of creating the positive mood environment in the testing center. And when you actually come to the actual exam, there's a couple things that you can do. In general, to stay focused on the task, I always say to students, again, your pencil is a weapon. Circle details if it's a paper-based test. When you circle important details like facts, figures, key terms, it reduces careless errors. And because it ensures that you're locked in, that you're working with care and clarity over the course of the entire test. I've literally seen the technique of circling details take students from a 30 to a 34 or a 1300 to a 1500 overnight. Swear to God, totally works. Even for computer tests, whether it's the GRE or GMAT, or the ACT that's going to be rolled out in the US, it's already happening overseas. There's a highlighter function. There's also that in the MCAT. You can jot down details in the paper. If you don't have a highlighter function, or like if it's the GMAT, you can use the whiteboard. This idea of getting things down, breaking it down, that really helps you stay in the moment and focus on what's most important. And then also this idea of breathing and rebooting. Okay, again, when you feel emotions, reconnect with your breath, recategorize your feelings as solely physical sensations, and ground yourself. So when I took the GRE a few years ago for my master's program, I tutored the GRE every week. Right? I know the test, but I still had to prepare myself for the experience, right? So I gave myself mock tests, and for myself, to ground myself, I would take my middle finger and thumb and I put it around my wrist. And that would transport me back to, what I call my happy place, which is basically like my bedroom where I can relax. And being able to do that allowed me to, again, ground myself, let go of tension, empty my mind, right? And focus back on the task. And, just also in general, on test day, this idea on breaks, keep to yourself. Do not engage other students. Too many people talk to other people about the test, and it takes you off your game. Don't do it. I have too many horror stories I don't even get into about students who made that mistake, and it really wound up costing them. So those are some general things. And then, for each of the sections, I like to focus the student on what I think the true task of the section is, what the basic actions are for that particular student, what she or he must do to perform, to capacity on test day so they can execute the task. So like, for example, on the TOEFL exam, I think the task in the reading on the TOEFL is to eliminate what you know is wrong for a fact first, and then choose the best of what's left, okay? That's, no matter who you are, that's the primary task of the section. But for one student in particular, who I was working with recently, I said to him, focus on what you're reading. In order for you to be able to perform the task, you must break the text into 3 to 5 word phrases and consider whispering to yourself or mouthing the words to keep you engaged. Okay. So again, the task for the actual test section, and then what does this particular student need to do in order to stay engaged to perform that task? Now, with something I might do, people kind of find this kind of interesting, is sometimes I'll have a student, or I'll recommend that the student put their ideas on a single index card, okay? And like a cheat sheet, and bring it with them to the test, but then to tear it up before they actually enter the testing center as a ceremonial way of saying, I'm ready, let's get it. So, other than that, I don't know, during the break, make sure you hydrate, move your body around, stretch, and then maybe finally, sort of after the test, do something fun, plan something fun after the test. So you have something to look forward to. So like a celebration lunch with family or friends, or at a restaurant, whatever it is, and it's gotta be fun, nothing stressful, not a big party or a trip somewhere where you don't want to be distracted from the task of actually taking the exam, right? But you give yourself something to look forward to. And then in some cases, the day before the test, you can ask the student, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? And they'd be like, well, I've got lunch with friends planned. And of course, before that, they have the, the SAT or the ACT, but it really helps giving students something, just kind of exciting to look forward to.
what I love about this, Chris, and how you've gone through in such detail is that basically what you're doing is as much thinking as you can before test day. So you've freed up all the space. You've made all of these decisions already. You don't have to make them in the moment. You've freed up this brain space to focus on the test itself. I feel like there's been so much information in this presentation. Thank you for all the excellent information on managing emotion and anxiety on test day. I was wondering if we could switch and answer some of the audience questions now. Is there time for that?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So a lot of the questions I feel like you have already answered, but they're the kinds of questions that come up a lot. So I think maybe it's worth kind of reiterating some of those points. Like Derek asks, what do you do when you're extremely nervous but can't calm down? So I know that there's been, you've answered this question in a couple different places, but this is the kind of moment students are really afraid of experiencing, and having some concrete things to do in that moment could be really helpful, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. This happened to me earlier today. And I reminded myself, remember to breathe. Right? It's one thing, it's one thing to know that breathing helps you sort of stay connected, in the moment, but you have to first remember. And when I'm extremely nervous, what I'll do is I'll actually exhale somewhat forcibly. So, right? I'll get it out forcibly, and then from there, once I feel like I've gotten that out, I'll take 3 deep breaths. And for me at this point in time, that's enough.
That's great. Great advice, and something really specific to do that forceful exhale. Isabel asks, in the case of, so if not answering a question makes you nervous and you're running low on time, what do you do? With those those are both issues I think students are either nervous about or might encounter, the running low on time, or you know you've missed one question. What do you do?
Yeah, sure. There's a couple of things to do here. We often do what I call like situational testing, right? Where we sort of help students prepare for those moments. And a good general tip in those moments is to choose one column, okay? The first column, second, third, fourth, or it's the math, a fifth column, if it's the ACT, right? Math, fifth column, and just bubble all those in, right? Because if there's 10 questions, if you look at the percentages, there's an equal percentage that, the first, second, third, or fourth column over the course of the test is going to be the correct answer, right? So I'd say in this particular case, I would say, let's say you've got let's say it's the ACT reading, and you're in the science passage, okay? You've got 10 questions, and you've got maybe I don't know, 3 minutes. What I would do here is I would look at small picture questions, ones that you can get really quickly. Okay, or if it's another section, it's like the math, find 3 questions you can answer really, really quickly, and just bubble the rest in. And what's interesting too is that if you're bubbling in 10 questions, you're probably gonna get at least 2 right.
And I love how you preface that with this, these situational testing moments you've already prepared for. So you know what you're going to do when you run out of time, or when you encounter the question that
so when you're in that moment, you actually know what to do, and you're not feeling stressed.
You don't have to think about it.
I mean, you may be I don't know, annoyed that you're not able to finish the section, but at least you're going to be getting points.
Right. So there are a couple of questions that came in earlier too, and some of these are a little bit more specific. Okay. One of them is not so much about anxiety, but it is about managing emotions, and it's one of your key preparation techniques, which is starting early. So the question is, when should I start my SAT studies if I am currently in 10th grade?
Currently in 10th grade? I would start now. I would start now because you have the time for it. Like I was saying earlier, you want to start early. I mean, look, let's be honest. no matter who I'm speaking to, whether they're in America or they're in the UK or they're in Europe, no one really has a full school day anymore, right? And so while we have the time, it actually be a very good use of your time to get ahead and again, start making the mistakes, right? You'll be extremely well served, down the road, because you'll have gotten through kind of all the bumps and bruises that you have to sort of experience before you're able to really internalize and start to really perform to capacity on the exam. So I'd say absolutely start now. Absolutely, whether you're working with somebody or working independently, just start getting yourself into the rhythm. Just start the process. Also, too, it's going to help debunk all the myths as to what the exam is.
Do we have time for another question?
Yeah, I'm
two?
happy.
Are you? Okay, so this one I think is interesting because I think although what you've said applies to any test you're taking, or even if you're performing, I mean, it's the advice has such broad application, but I think when you've given specific examples, it's been about the SAT or ACT, and there is a student who's asking what's the strategy to take the online AP tests? Do you have any specific advice for the online AP test?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we're still learning about what it's going to be, but my understanding right now is that it's just going to be a DBQ. Okay. And so the interface is probably be like a field or a dialog box where you're going to be entering in, a written response. And so it's really going to be about like doing the work sort of off the screen, and then actually it's like typing up your response. So it's really no different from working on a word processor, working on Google Docs or, just like Microsoft Word. So what I'd say is I would start to prepare for the DBQ.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I don't know what a DBQ is.
Yeah. So I'm using the DBQ. So like, for example, DBQ is a document-based question. It's one of the types of
okay.
prompts that students sort of meet on the U.S. history AP, which is a very popular test for U.S. high school juniors. And so my point being is that do your DBQ as you normally would, but you would then want to just write your response directly into a Word doc or a Google Doc as opposed to like handwriting it. And if someone wants to put into the Q&A a different AP test they may be taking where you're not really faced with DBQ, I'm happy to answer that question as well. So there's also a question here, Nyssa, that came in through the chat thread from Arya. I don't know if you mentioned this, but how do you stay calm when you are debating during a multiple choice question between two different answers? I frequently go through this problem, even if I'm well prepared, but always panic. Yeah. So there's a few different ways to handle this depending on what particular test you're dealing with. Arya, if you want, just tell me in this thread here what test you might be preparing for or taking. I can be more specific, but I'll say that if it's the ACT science or reading, or if it's the SAT reading, I'd say you want to back solve the answer choices. And what I mean by that is, if it's down to two, one of those two has a fatal flaw, right? And questions are wrong for one of four reasons. Either they're irrelevant, they're true but wrong, so true for the question, true for the passage, wrong for the question, okay? Half right, the first half of the question, of the answer choice is right, second half is wrong, or it's simply irrelevant, okay? Those are reasons why questions are wrong. And if that doesn't help, then you want to back solve, meaning, let's say it's the reading. If I were the author, or if I was the author of this passage, and I was trying to achieve or do answer choice B, what would it look like? What's the movie in your mind look like of that action playing out? Okay, do the same thing for the other answer choice. Which of those two, when you bring it back to the text, seem to be the more relevant, or which one seems to be irrelevant? Those are some quick tips on how to, when you're down to two, how to get them right. What else, Nyssa? Other questions? Other Q&A?
Let me see. I think you've covered most of the questions that have been asked either in our question and answer or just previously. There's one other question from Isabel that I think is an important question, which is, what do you do when you start to lose focus at the end of the test?
Yeah, so two things. Number one, you can sort of preempt that by making sure that you're exercising regularly, that you're having, that you're sleeping well, that you had a good breakfast, and that you're having a snack at the break. The snack at the break is really key, right? So that's one way to preempt it. And then even if you've done all of those and you're still losing focus on the exam, that's when you double down on circling details. That's when you double down on getting the pen moving, okay, the pencil moving on the paper, or you do some other physical activity to keep yourself locked in. I had a student last year who's now a freshman at Georgetown. He took the ACT and he had ADHD and he lost focus all the time, okay? The way we kept him sort of engaged in the exam was, I said, keep your pen moving. If you can keep yourself moving physically through the pen, and if not the pen, maybe switching your seat, right? Getting your feet back on the ground, you will stay engaged. You won't have getting like a 34 in the ACT.
Wow. Well, that's great because it goes back to the previous advice you'd given about circling and just keeping moving. So it serves those two purposes and can raise your score both ways. So I've just looked back over the questions we got earlier, and there's one. Can we do one more? Do you?
Yeah,
okay, great. So when you feel like your exam went all wrong, it's hard to continue with the same discipline or even with the same test, right? What would you do?
I call this step 0, right? So in the Great Expectations book, I sort of outline or give access to the 50 steps to guaranteeing success on the SAT or the ACT. And you know, the 50 steps are great, but if you haven't really embraced step 0, nothing really actually is going to matter. And that's really about commitment. Have you really, truly brought everything to this process? Have you really, truly made the commitment to engage with this exam, with this process in the right way? There's no escaping it. So until you make the decision to prepare the right way, you know, if you don't make that decision to make that commitment, it's not going to happen. So with respect to that question, I would say this: have you really, truly committed to doing it the right way? And if you haven't, great, right? Now you know where to start. And once you do start to engage the right way, you know, that's when you'll start to see the improvements, and then the process becomes a lot more enjoyable and successful. What else, Nyssa? Other questions, Nyssa?
That's I feel like you've answered all the questions. Do you see any that that I've overlooked?
Let me see. Let me go into the. Okay, so a couple more here from Isabel. Not the Isabel that we were talking about earlier.
No.
So there's one more here. If you do not feel prepared for the test but still have to do it the next day, how do you handle a thought during the test? Sure. Really interesting question. So I would say, you know, this happens a lot, right? You want to go into the exam, whether it's your first test, second, third, fourth, being able to do something constructive. You want it to be a positive experience. And so in this case, you may go in looking to use it as a mock test and know that you're going to cancel it, right? So it's just a mock testing experience. And I call that market research, right? You're going into the test, you're going into the testing environment, you're seeing what's going on, you're seeing how your body responds. And, you know, we don't really know how we're going to respond until we're actually in the experience, we're in the room, right? Whether you have someone helping you or not, you don't really know how you're going to respond. So I say in those cases, make your one goal, show up and sit the test through. And again, you can cancel the exam before you leave. And again, if you're not feeling prepared for the test, it's probably because it's early in the process. And so these are perfectly useful and acceptable ways of using, the actual testing experience to learn how to, do better next time.
Yeah, so that's an amazing advantage of the ACT and SAT, is that students can take it multiple times. It makes such a difference.
And everybody does. Everybody, even if they don't say they do. They do. So, what else, Nyssa? Well, I have a question for you, actually.
Okay.
There's been a lot in this sort of session, but I would love to know from your perspective, what is maybe like the one thing that you think people have to keep in mind to help them stay calm, during exams, do away with anxiety and maximize their score?
Oh, actually, what I'd like to say is something that I'm not sure if it made it into this presentation, but I've heard you say it before. And you did say this in some form in this presentation, which is stay focused on the task. And not just that, but anytime you spend either thinking about how you're doing, even if you feel like you're doing well, that's time that you're not focused on the task. I find that's just, I think, such an important thing, that the way you do well in the test is by staying focused on the task, and don't let your brain fool you into thinking you're focused on the task when you're really thinking about your progress.
Right. That's like when people walk out of the exam and they're like, "Oh, I totally aced it." I always shudder. I'm like, no, these tests are hard. If you are walking out saying that you aced it, it means you probably weren't locked in, focused on the task, and picking up on nuance and detail. And usually those stories, those students are they're surprised by their scores because they're not as strong as they thought. Whereas with students who come out of the exam, like, I don't know. It was challenging. Those are the students I'm like, you know what? We're going to see some good scores here. They know they engage in the exam on the level it's supposed to be engaged with. So yeah.
And what about you? Do you have any parting words of wisdom after? I mean, there's a lot in this presentation, but any last words students should take away?
I mean, I go back to that Seth Godin quote. I think I referred to it earlier. You don't need to be perfect nor be remarkable, right? Take action, but be okay making mistakes. At some point, you'll have made so many mistakes that there won't be any more mistakes to make, and you'll become confident, on your tests and in other areas of your life. That's really what I'd say. It's okay to make mistakes, embrace mistakes. It's okay to fail. Fail better, fail again.
Well, thank you for that, Chris. And before we go, I just want to make sure everyone knows that if you're looking for help on how to overcome test anxiety, manage your emotion during testing, please reach out. Please feel free to reach out to us. We have a number of people on our team, like me or Chris, who would be happy to help you either privately or in a group format. And even an hour, actually, just an hour with an expert can really transform student scores, especially if they've already done the content and there's that last piece that's missing. Just getting some expert advice can make a big difference. So on behalf, and as you, you can, I think I need to go one, so here we go. So here's our email address and our phone numbers if you'd like to get into contact with us. And on behalf of Chris and the Kate's team, best wishes to you and yours for health and safety during this time. I know it's a strange time. And thank you so much for attending.
Okay, thanks. Take care.